Let's talk some chess. So with Hikaru Nakamura's surprise elimination from the FIDE World Cup of Chess last week, I found myself reminiscing some of his great games. This game, Hikaru himself considers the greatest game he's ever played. It was against Boris Gelfand in 2010. Hikaru's playing with black pieces, and we'll just kick it right off with d4 from Gelfand. We have knight to c6, c4, g6 by Hikaru, knight to c3, and bishop to g7, fianchettoing the dark squared bishop, and this is very standard operating procedure, very normal stuff. We have e4 pushing in the center. The pawn is attacked by the knight, but it's also defended by Gelfand's knight, so no problems here with the e4 pawn. d6 by Hikaru, perhaps preparing ideas like e5, challenging in the center, but for the moment just knight to f3 by Gelfand, and Hikaru castles kingside. Bishop to e2. e5 now as referenced, striking these three very excellent pawns in the center of the board, but Gelfand ignores it and castles kingside for the moment. We have knight to c6, adding pressure to this d4 square, so here just d5 by Gelfand attacking this knight on c6, sort of closing the position and forcing this knight to move away, and move away it does. We have knight to e7, now potentially rerouting this knight to the king side where all the action will be, but first and foremost getting it away from the attack of the pawn on c6. Knight to d2 is played, two kind of symmetric knights here, very nice. Sometimes you get some artistic positions in chess, and you know these knights sort of are certainly one of them, but Hikaru unfortunately breaks it with knight to e8. We have b4 by Boris, trying to gain space on the queen side, push these pawns and just slowly gain a positional advantage. And Hikaru does a similar sort of idea with f5 on the king side. This pawn is protected by the knight and the bishop, so hoping to sort of expand, and the rook, I should mention, hoping sort of to expand and get his pieces into this vacuum of space and get an attack going against Boris's king. We have c5 by Boris attacking this d6 pawn. Here knight to f6, so we saw this knight rerouted back to e8, and now sort of you can see the idea behind Hikaru's moves. The knight was rerouted first to e8, so we could get in, or Hikaru could get in this f5 move, and then after the knight's out of the way, the pawn moves, then you can bring the knight back to f6. So essentially switching, teleporting this pawn around the knight, and the knight moves back and forth to achieve it. But now Hikaru has two very nice knights and a very nice pawn structure on the king side. f3 here by Boris, f4 again closing the position, keeping the tension, creating a very nice diagonal for Hikaru's light squared bishop. And the game continues with knight to c4. g5 here by Hikaru, a4, so just, again, no pieces have been captured yet. This is just very positional, trying to gain space, trying to get an advantage, and knight to g6, starting to get the knight closer to the enemy king and getting pieces into this sort of vacuum of space. Bishop to a3, rook to f7, a nice rook lift, getting the rook to slightly more active rank. I guess not that that matters, but maybe if the queen wants to come to f8 and create a battery along the f-file, so just a rook lift here, and now b5, pushing on the queen side. D takes on c5, the first capture of the game. Bishop takes on c5, and now h5 by Hikaru, really pushing these pawns and pushing these pieces and trying to create pressure against this king. And it's a reasonable idea. He has 4 pieces in the vicinity. These pawns will be sort of bouldering, what's the word? It's like the things that knock down the doors. Some ram. When you're attacking a castle and you have like a log and you're trying to hit the door down. I should know what this is. Anyways, comment if you know. I will probably think of it later. But just pushing these pawns forward to try to create an opening and get after the king. a5 on the queen side. So both sides are sort of pushing their pawns and trying to gain space. Hikaru on the king side, Boris on the queen side. Hikaru continues with g4. Boris continues with b6. So just very exciting stuff. Battering ram. That's what it's called. It's called a battering ram. Got it. You probably realized that way before me. And now g3 by Hikaru. Again, beautiful pathway for this light squared bishop, a nice little stairway for Hikaru's pawns, and Boris has to be very careful here. The thing is that Boris is certainly gaining a lot of space on the queen side. He has plenty of pieces here, these 2 pawns, and Hikaru is gaining a lot of space on the king side. He has all these pawns and all these pieces, but Boris's king is on the king side, so he has to be very careful. You can win on the queen side by pushing these pawns, winning a piece, getting a positional advantage. But the more immediate threat is, of course, checkmate, and you have to be careful when there's all this pressure against Boris's king. So here he plays king to h1, getting off of the g file, not letting bishop takes on h2 come with check, and here bishop to f8 by Hikaru, offering up a trade of this very strong bishop on c5. Here Boris ignores it and just plays d6, and now this is a pretty dangerous pawn. It's protected by the bishop, protected by the bishop, the knight, and the queen. So Hikaru first takes on b6, a takes on b6, threatening the bishop on g1, and now instead of trading pieces off and maybe giving up the rook on a1, Boris just retreats the bishop all the way back to g1. And there's a defensive idea here too. You want to protect this h2 pawn h2 square and h2 pawn from Hikaru's pawn on g3. So we get knight to h4 by Hikaru, and now things are starting to get very exciting. This knight, we've sort of seen it be rerouted into the game, and now it's getting very close to Boris's king. And here Boris plays rook to e1, which is sort of a crucial position for the rook to be in this position. But now see if you can find Hikaru's move while I just give you a moment or two that really puts a stamp on this game and elevates this game to the next level. Okay, it's not the move the engine recommends, but that's fine. We don't care about that. These are two humans playing, and so you can't always play exactly what technically the best move is. You sort of have to play what move looks good to a human and what move is playable for human players. And in this case, it's knight takes on g2. And what's really important about this move is that it eliminates the pawn from the g2 square. We'll see why that's so crucial in a couple of moves. And this also comes with an attack on the rook on e1. So Gelfand moving the rook to e1. Unfortunately, now this knight is attacking with a tempo. And here, Boris actually decides to ignore this and goes for d takes on c7, attacking Hikaru's queen on d8. And he thinks that Hikaru will deal with this threat first. But this is where Hikaru really plays the next crucial move. So see if you can find this move by Hikaru while I give you a couple of seconds. I also said Boris thought that Hikaru would do this. I'm not sure. I didn't read his comments on the game. I'm assuming that's what happened. I'm assuming he thinks that Hikaru maybe will capture the pawn or sort of get out of the way with the queen. But instead, Hikaru plays a wonderful Zwischenzug, which I might be mispronouncing. I'll link it below. The idea behind this move is sort of instead of making the expected move, which in this case is either trading the queen on d1, so queen takes queen, rook takes queen, getting the rook out of harm's way, or even maybe queen takes pawn looks fine to me. Instead of playing that, you play a really important in-between move that really can't be ignored, and here that move is knight takes on e1, so kudos if you found that move. And now this is a really interesting position for Hikaru. It looks like he's just sacrificed a queen to a pawn on d8. This square isn't even protected, so literally Gelfand, it looks like, can capture the queen and promote a queen. So a two-queen swing for Gelfand looks like a no-brainer. But he actually can't do this because, again, remember how Hikaru eliminated this g2 pawn. Now Hikaru could just play g2, and this, in fact, is checkmate. The knight is protecting the pawn. The king has nowhere to go. The pawn is checking the king. Just a wonderful mating picture here. And it doesn't matter that Boris has two queens and Hikaru has none. This is checkmate. So after this knight takes on e1, Gelfand, of course, sees this and takes the knight back with the queen. And now before we get onto this, let's just say there is a better defense after knight takes on g2. It's not taking with the pawn on c7. It's king takes knight on g2. But Boris probably looked at this and decided not to go into it because now you get rook to g7, and now this looks quite threatening with the rook on the same file as the king. You could get d takes on c7, pawn takes on h2, opening up a discovered check from the rook to the king. After the king goes to h1, promotion to a queen, so pawn captures bishop. That goes a little bit fast, the animation. So pawn captures bishop on g1, promotes to a queen, rook takes, and now finally queen takes on c7. And probably Boris looked at this and didn't want to go into this. The king looks very unsafe here. The rook is threatening, so is the queen, and maybe he didn't think this was a good position to go into, or didn't see sort of Hikaru's plan. So instead, he decided to take on c7. So that's how he got to this point. Again, knight takes on e1, queen takes on e1, and now finally this g2 move. No longer checkmate because there's no knight on e1 protecting this pawn on g2, but the king is forced to take, which it does on g2, but now you get rook to g7 with check, and now the rook is controlling this wonderfully open g file. The king retreats back to h1, and now bishop to h3, another very saucy move by Hikaru, again just sacrificing his queen on d8, and again Boris can capture a queen and go up a queen, it seems, but of course this doesn't work because of bishop to g2. Same exact idea as before. This time the rook is protecting the bishop, and the bishop is checkmating the king. So instead, Boris covers up with bishop to f1, obviously protecting this g2 square, but now we get queen to d3, finally moving away from the attack of this this pawn on d8, but Hikaru still insists on sacrificing the queen, offering up a sacrifice of bishop takes queen. Of course, you can't accept this because bishop takes, then you abandon the reason why you move the bishop to f1 is to prevent checkmate on g2, so that of course doesn't work, but the queen is attacking the bishop, and it's attacking these two knights. I guess this knight is defended from the queen, but it's attacking this knight on c4, so something you have to deal with. Here, Boris moves the knight away from c4 and attacks the queen on d3, but now we just get another wonderful move by Hikaru, continues to sacrifice the queen. Here he takes the bishop on f1, and again the queen is being sacrificed on d3, but again, same idea. If knight takes, bishop to g2 is checkmate. It's checkmate, so that doesn't work. So instead, just queen takes on f1, but now sort of the move that Hikaru probably had to see to really go into this line. He had to see all these moves, but this is kind of the crucial one. Queen takes knight on c3, and what's really wonderful about this move is that it's forking the rook and the knight, so Hikaru is going to be up material no matter what. Here you save the rook to c1, and now queen takes on e5. And this is essentially game over. You do have this this c8 move promoting to a queen, but after rook takes, then Hikaru played queen to e6, and in this position, Boris resigned the game. Even though he was able to get rid of that rook on a8, Hikaru's rook on a8, he still is down material, he's down a knight, and Hikaru also actually has a pawn. So after this rook moves, he can even capture the pawn on well, maybe Gelfand would defend the rook, but anyways, Hikaru's up a piece. That's sort of what matters, and Boris resigned the game. So an awesome game. This is just a wonderful idea of Hikaru, as I'm going all the way back, to get rid of this g2 pawn and just essentially for the next 10 moves threaten either the pawn or this light squared bishop, which makes it over, to deliver checkmate to the enemy king, and that sort of forces Boris to kind of pull out all the stops and defend. And I also like the other theme, which is just Hikaru constantly sacrificing the queen. Sacrifices it to the pawn here, sacrifices it to the bishop and the knight later in the game, and obviously none of those sacrifices could actually be accepted. So a wonderful game. Again, Hikaru, I think, says it was his best game ever. Certainly inclined to agree, of course. Can't disagree with Hikaru on that one, but an awesome game. Hope you enjoyed it. Drop a like, drop subscribe. Let me know of other games you'd like me to review, and we'll see you next time.